Last time I talked about the first generation of Pokemon. I talked about the first games of the series and my thoughts on it. If you haven't seen it yet, I'd suggest you do that now. Today, I will be doing a much longer analysis of the second generation. Generation 2 came out something like 3 years after the first generation, in the US anyways. And what's on the cover? Two giant bird-like Pokemon. We'll talk about that later. These games were Gold, Silver, and later Crystal. This time there was no confusion with the games, they were all the same in Japan. Although, what I want to know is why did they decide to change it from common colors like red and blue to colors that are also metals, and this skips until Platinum, I believe. Anyways, let's sink our teeth into this sweet series of games. Let's start off with the story. This game is supposed to be a direct sequel to the other games, and by the other games I mean the first generation games. The later games won't have much, if not anything, to do with the other games. So, the story takes place 3 years after Red becomes champion in the first generation. We're introduced to Johto, a new region which is right next to Kanto, but instead of going west to east, we're going east to west. So, we can play the role of Gold, or Ethan, if whatever you want to call him, and this is for Gold and Silver, by the way. We'll talk about Crystal a little later on. So, Ethan lives in Newbark Town, where he's asked to do something for Professor Elm to get an egg from his friend. Once there, you meet Professor Oak, who has seen your potential and gives you a Pokedex to fill out. Much like the first generations, Elm is excited and tells you that you can take on the League and a bunch of other stuff, and thus this is the base for our story. Along the way, you have to deal with Team Rocket and a new rival, both which we'll talk about later. Once you defeat the 8 gyms, you get to go to the League and battle once again the Elite Four. And yes, it's the same Elite Four for Kanto and Johto. After that, Elm is so happy he gives you a ticket so you can go to Kanto by boat. And that's amazing because you get to re-explore the Kanto region, which is really awesome. Once here, you can re-battle all the gyms and do them in any order pretty much. And the gym leaders have been training for 3 young years though, so they don't have the same level 8 team, level 27 team. They have really tough teams. But again, we'll talk more about that later. Once you get all 16 badges, both from Johto and Kanto, you're pretty much done with the game. There's one thing left for you to do, but we'll discuss that later. The story is actually a lot longer than the other games, and it makes sense. In the first generation, you were given a Pokedex, and off you go. Here, at least, Elm gives you to do a simple task where you were, by chance, asked to do something by Professor Oak to fill out the Pokedex, because of your potential or whatever. Now let's talk about some of the differences of Generation 1 and Generation 2 gameplay-wise. The gyms are more diverse here. For example, the first gym leader is a master at flying types, so if you chose a grass starter, you're in for a tough time, whereas the fire starter in Generation 1 had this problem with the first gym. The levels of the gym leaders Pokemon also seem to drop. At one point they don't go over 35. That's pretty low, but only because you have to deal with the Kanto gyms later on too, so I guess they didn't want you being around level 50 or so while in Kanto. As for Pokemon, there are about 100 new ones to catch. Again, with the version exclusives and everything, it's not easy, and plus with Celebi, it's near impossible. There are also new features in this game, the biggest one being the day and night system. At the start of the game, you can set your clock, date, time, and all that, so it was pretty cool. At night, you can catch certain Pokemon such as Hu-Oh and do other things at night as well. This was a great idea, and it made the game more lifelike. Another new feature is the Pokegear. It's like a radio, and it's kind of like a Zune HD or an iPod Touch, in which it's not a touch or anything like that, but it has radio and apps. You can check your map and even use Skype to use the Pokegear. No, I'm just kidding, but you can make calls and other useful things like that, so it can be really useful or it can be really annoying. Another new feature is breeding shiny Pokemon and the Pokerus. Breeding was just that. Get 2 compatible Pokemon and you can breed them at the daycare center to get an egg of it. I won't get too much into it, but that's it in a nutshell. Shiny Pokemon was just eye candy. The Pokemon would have a different color and it was just extremely rare. Finally, the Pokerus was a very helpful virus that, helped it grow, if that makes any sense, but we'll discuss that more in the later generations when it becomes more useful. This generation also had a happiness system which Pokemon evolved if it was really happy. 2 new types of Pokemon were also introduced, Steel and Dark type, and that's pretty cool, and it also gave us more moves and stats. This gen was making things a little more complicated than the first generation, which was simple. The music again is fantastic, and for me, the music in this game is much more memorable than any other generations. This includes the newer one as well. As I mentioned earlier, you do have another rival, one much more serious and darker than Blue, and his name is Silver. At the start, we see this guy peeking into Elm's lab. When you talk to him, he kicks your ass. Literally, he kicks your ass. Once you're done with Professor Oak, Elm will call you and tell you that someone stole his Pokemon, and it's none other than Silver. He challenges you to a battle, and in these games is known as question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark at this point. Yeah, I'm serious. He's known as 4 question marks. Apparently he says his name, but it's censored, and once at the lab you tell the police his name and therefore you get to name him. It's kinda silly to censor it, but it's a better way of naming him than, Oak forgetting his own grandson's name. His personality is much darker than Blue, where Blue is just an arrogant brat who wanted to become the best trainer by magic. Silver just wants to become strong and understands that it takes time and discipline to do so. We've shown evidence he trains his Pokemon very well, but because he uses them as tools rather than friends, much like Blue. We also learn of a strong hate for Team Rocket, which I'll discuss later. If that isn't enough, he again steals another Pokemon from some poor guy. Sheesh, what a jerk. However, this was kind of cool because this meant that he can get a Pokemon not available to us, so they dealt with this nicely, I think. However, he comes across Lance, who, yeah, we'll talk about a little later, or let's talk a little bit about him now. If you remember, Lance was the 4th member of the Elite Four in the other games. Lance beats him in a battle and tells him he's strong, but he doesn't trust his Pokemon or love him or something like that. This also shows us that perhaps his Pokemon do trust him to a point and respect him, as they see him and know that he is a good trainer. But because he doesn't care for them as friends, they can't get any stronger. He also challenges us to prove that he is strong, but of course he loses. He then states he's tired of losing to Ethan and thinks about what Lance told him and decides to train his Pokemon with love rather than by force or whatever. Later on, before we challenge the Elite Four, he wants to battle us again. This time to show Ethan that he knows how to train his Pokemon with love. The certain fact that he cares so much to become strong as to him learning to love his Pokemon to become strong is great. Of course, this is a basic theme. If you want to become strong, train the bond with you and your Pokemon, and well, I guess that's what Lance said, and Silver actually listened. But it doesn't stop there. I'm going to jump ahead to the remakes for a little bit, and we'll get more into it later on. But in our Gold and Soul Silver, we hear that Silver went back to Elm to talk, probably to return the stolen Pokemon that he stole earlier in the game and apologize. Elm, however, sees that the Pokemon he stole is very happy with him and tells him he can go ahead and keep it. Silver is a much more interesting rival than Blue. Silver was tough, awesome, and skilled. His team is actually different too. Blue had the basic mix of Pokemon, but Silver's team is a bit more complex, having a Ghost, Dark, and Psychic types on his team. Along with the starter and Electric type, he has another Pokemon, his Golbat. It's a Golbat for a really long time, and in the end it evolved into a Crobat, which evolves with happiness that we discussed about earlier. This means that the Golbat became happy with the new Silver, and it did evolve, further proving Silver's change of heart. Man, I love Silver. Just the change he goes through and the repent he shows afterwards, I really wish he had a large role in the anime, because that would have been really cool. But he only got like 2 seconds some special or something, I don't know, I didn't really watch it. Paul from the Diamond and Pearl series of the anime was kinda like them, but I don't think he was as developed as Silver was. And unlike Blue, Silver had a personality that was unique. The whole game were spanned with how people and Pokemon should trust each other and such to grow stronger and blah blah blah. But Silver was a very nice change in pace, and it was different from that. Even after he turned good, we can see it's not easy to change, and it's actually somewhat of a subtle message we can learn from him. To change our bad ways and ask for forgiveness from those we've hurt. Although kind of a weird thing learning this from some Pokemon games. It's pretty deep. Also, unlike Blue, he has a backstory. He wasn't just some heartless guy who just hated everything for no reason. He had a reason. Where Blue was just a loser because his parents didn't raise him. I don't know. If Oak can't remember his name, maybe he was neglected all his life. Anyways, again in the remakes, the Celebi event allows you to go into the past to 3 years ago. We witnessed Giovanni and Silver talking. Well, why are they talking? Well, it turns out Silver is Giovanni's son and blames his defeat from Red, and he runs away abandoning Silver. Silver blames the weakened Team Rocket for this, and thus he wants to become strong and hates Team Rocket. So that's pretty cool, huh? We also see more from the event, but hold on for just a second. We'll get into that in just a minute. Silver is one of the best character developments I've seen in any game in general, not just the Pokemon game, in any game in general. One last thing about Silver to mention is something about his Pokemon, Sneasel and Magneton. It was fine if they were in his Generation 2 team, but in Generation 4, Sneasel and Magneton had new evolutions by then, so why not use them? Well, I can think of 3 reasons why they didn't use them, but they're all flawed in and of itself. 1. Magneton can evolve only in Mount Coronet or in Chargestone Cave, so the creators thought it would be unfair if you got one. But what about Sneasel? What's his reason? And if you can give a certain trainer in Generation 5 a fully evolved Pokemon at a level where it doesn't evolve fully, then why can't you give Silver a damn Magnezone? 2. Silver used a Weavile in the original games, so they thought that Weavile was overused in Platinum. But who cares? In the Generation 5 games, the Elemental Monkeys get really old really fast, so why not give him a Weavile? 3. They wanted to give him his original team. Well, that's all nice and all, but you gave everyone else in the post-game a Generation 4 upgrade. Why couldn't you do this for Silver? It's just bothersome that Silver got screwed over, and that just really sucks. Well, enough of that. Let's talk about Team Rocket this time. They return in this game to, of course, no good. Even though we beat them in the last game, so why are they back? Well, it turns out 4 executives of Team Rocket want Giovanni back, so they have a plan, and a really dumb one at that. We first see Team Rocket chopping off Slowpoke tails and selling them for money. Who would do such a thing? We then see them, I don't know, wanting dance lessons. After that, we find them at the Lake of Rage, and apparently they have made a radio signal that makes all Magikarps evolve forcefully. Why do they do this? What's the point? I really don't know. From what I understand, it's to sell them for money. But now wait, it gets even better. In Goldenrod, the radio tower has been taken over, and they do this to, guess. They do this to send a message to Giovanni via radio and tell him to come back to Team Rocket. What kind of lame brain plan is that? And what do they want the money for anyways? Just to be greedy? What a useless, stupid plan. Lance from before also shows up and tries to help and tries to stop them, but it makes it seem like it's the end of the world if we don't stop them. Why not just find Giovanni and arrest them? Jeez, Lance, you're so useless. Again, Team Rocket fails hard. Not to mention it doesn't even show up, and by he I mean Giovanni, and Team Rocket gives up. And that same time, and the same Celebi event from before, and that same time, we travel back to the time where the signal is being held and Giovanni wants to go back, but it leads it to a battle to sea. Because we win, he decides to leave Team Rocket forever, and instead of going back to his son, he runs away again. Forever, pretty much. So there's no real point to this. Seriously, there isn't. Although to be fair, stopping Team Rocket this time makes more sense than it did in the first generation.